Well, good morning. This is the first time you have heard a male voice from this pulpit in a while that doesn't speak with a British accent. I'm feeling a little insecure about that. Nevertheless, we'll persevere with hope that you can see me beyond this middle-aged Midwestern white guy locution, not elocution. Today's sermon is billed as my reflection on stewardship at Epiphany, as a means of coming up here and encouraging all of you to generously contribute to this year's annual appeal. Lee Anderson Brooks last Sunday spoke about why he and Debbie make Epiphany their top philanthropic contribution each year. If you haven't seen the clip that was sent out on that sermon, I encourage you to take a look at it. Because he talks about what it meant to be in relationship, even tangentially, to the church when he was a child growing up in England, and how the church was there. And how the church was there and shined perpetually a positive light upon his regular secular life. And you know, Epiphany seeks to do that as well within the community that we sit in. We do with Halloween candy, right? And neighborhood picnics and bouncy houses and blessing pets and music in the courtyard and a bunch more things. Organized by the guiding hand of Amanda Eep. Do you know Amanda? Your pledge pays her salary. Thank you for that. Lee also talked about Epiphany as a learning church, a place for transformation, for studying Jesus, for worshiping God. And that includes a lot of what we do here. And it absorbs a lot of time and a lot of energy. My time and energy and Lex's and Pam's and Diane's and Jad's, even through the wonderful leadership of our music team, of whom there are many, including Laura and John and Zach and Julian and Kathia and Emily. And your pledge pays for their salaries. Thank you for that. And finally, Lee talked about the amplification of good works through our collective efforts. And those efforts are employed for our community, but also around the world, including the Holy Land. Now, I've traveled to the Holy Land with 127 of you over the years. A couple of you have been on that trip with me, right? A bunch. And in that time, we've donated over $147,000 through the American Friends of the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem to orphanages and to hospitals and to rehabilitation centers. And some of you have visited those places with me as well. And so we've been there. We've been to the Holy Land. We've eaten there and we've drank there. We've walked the streets. We've rubbed shoulders with people who live there. We've met with Jewish and Arab politicians. We've dined at people's homes. We've prayed in holy places. We have celebrated the Eucharist. We've had spiritual moments of insight and spiritual moments of uncertainty as well. At least I have. And in those moments, I've met the hope of Jesus. Without hope, life can get pretty dark pretty quickly. Today in Israel and Palestine, there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, as the cycle of revenge and despair that has so knotted these two cultures together in perpetual conflict has been reignited. Imagine for a moment what it must feel like to live in a world where you have nowhere else to go, where you feel cornered and trapped, where you are is all you are going to get, and someone is coming after you, someone is coming after your family. What you imagine is the reality in the lives of Israelis and in the lives of Palestinians. And that is the horror that we are watching unfold today. Gaza is the most densely populated place in the world. 2 million people living within the confines of a space the size of the 5 boroughs of New York City. A place that is often called, and has been for a long time, the largest open-air prison in the world. Where the economy is driven by charitable donations and the best jobs fall to those lucky few who stand in line for hours every single day to move through the checkpoints out of Gaza to take low-wage jobs in Israel. There's a humiliation baked into the system in which they are trapped. And I can only imagine what that feels like. I can see it. And I also can imagine the anger, the deep anger, the demand for revenge that stirs in the heart of the Jewish Israelis. With an enemy just to your north, right there, who has proclaimed they want to annihilate you. And then you see the slaughter of innocent people. I can only imagine how that feels. I can see it. And I have no solution to offer to this cycle of despair and revenge that spins out perpetually between the Israelis and the Palestinians. But we do not come to church seeking political solutions. That's not what we do here. We do not come to church for confirmation of our own particular political points of view. That's not what we do here. We come to church because this is a place where we seek to understand the world as it really is and as it can really be from a different point of view. We seek to understand the world from a Jesus perspective. We seek to understand the world from a resurrection perspective, which promises that the bad thing is never the last thing. And sometimes that perspective is hard to grasp and to integrate because of the pain and the anger and the despair and the confusion that can flood our minds in the face of what seems to be an intractable problem. And sometimes the only response when our minds are spinning and we become dizzy is to fall backwards, to let go, and to trust God. Because this is what I can guarantee: when you fall backward, you will be caught by the church. Because that is the role of the church. That is the very function of the church, to hold on to hope for all the world. The church is designed to do this. We are an institution of hope. Now, today's gospel is an example that can move us towards hope. And you're wondering, really? At first glance, right? You're not quite sure. Because it sounds a little dualistic, doesn't it? It sounds pretty divisive, laced with violence, seemingly dedicated to division. And from my regular Midwest, middle-aged guy context living in super secular Seattle, the gospel sounds like an accountability degree dictated by God, who is choosing winners and losers. And if you're a loser, there's despair. And if you're a winner, there's revenge, which fuels the cycle that is crippling so many corners of the world. But I'm maybe just a little bit more than a regular guy living in secular Seattle. Just a little bit. And this is why. Because I've chosen to be a Christian. It's a choice. It's a choice we make over and over again. And I've chosen to be a follower of Jesus. And Jesus proclaims that we can find something in parts of today's gospel to give us insight into the kingdom of God. Okay? So let's take a look. We have a king, father. He loves his son. Son gets married. He's having a big wedding. He invites all of their friends, but they can't come because they're too busy curating their own little kingdoms. Their own little kingdoms over here, they're too busy. So the father says, that's okay. Throws open the doors, invites everybody in town. He invites the good people and he invites the bad people. In other words, he invites the regular people just like you and me. Just like the people who come to Epiphany. Fills the place. And when they arrive, they are given what? A garment. They're given a robe to wear. That was the custom in those days. Now, the tradition behind those wedding robes is that they're put on to cover up what you're wearing. Right? They cover up the medals. Insignias, they cover up the Brooks Brothers insignias and the fancy shoes and the $1,000 brooches. And those robes are woven from a fabric called the soul. And there's only one distributor of soul robes. You know who that is, don't you? That's God, right? God's cornered to that market. And when we put them on, we reveal one thing. Everybody who's wearing those robes reveals one thing: the equality of all people. So the marriage celebration in the gospel today is about relationship. It's about relationship between two people, but it's also about relationship with Jesus and his church. It's also about the relationship that exists between the Trinity, right? Father and Son and Holy Ghost. In a marriage, there is no hierarchy. There are no insiders or outsiders. There are no winners or losers. There are only souls, equally known and equally loved by God. You with me? Little? And so the guests arrive at the wedding festival, the good and the bad, and when they get there, they're handed a robe and they slip it on. They slip on the soul robe so they can honor the king and they can honor the king's son. And yet there's one guy. There's one guy who refuses to put on the robe. Maybe because it's going to cover up his fancy Armani coat that he bought for the party. Or maybe, maybe he thinks he's just a little bit better, inherently, just a little bit better than everybody else, and he's not going to put on one of those robes. Or maybe he doesn't even believe in the soul. Maybe he thinks that's just crazy stuff. That's hogwash. That's goofy metaphysics. That's old stuff. But what he doesn't realize is that the robe allows him to see. And without it, there is no light. Without it, it's all darkness. To put on the wedding garment is to wear the soul on your sleeve, if you will. It's to live a soul-first lifestyle, which is a lifestyle that allows you to see the soul of the other principally and primarily. But this guy chooses not to put on the robe, which reflects an inner rebellion against God, a rebellion that is binding, maybe self-binding, locking him in a cycle of weeping and gnashing of teeth. And the king's curious about that. The king's curious. So he asks him about the decision, and what's the man say? He says nothing. Because where he has set himself by the decisions he has made over a period of time puts him outside the realm of the answers, the solutions. See, hope would have been his best reply, but he had no words of hope because he did not believe in the soul. Hope is built upon the foundation, the foundational understanding of the soul. Let me say that again. Hope is built upon the foundational understanding of the soul, of its equality, of its belovedness, of its connection to God by God's decision alone. We have, and I've said this before, we have no influence over the soul. The soul comes from God, the soul is sustained by God, and the soul returns to God. And the church simply is about the celebration of the soul, which is why the church is an institution of hope. Now, if the church disappears, the church goes away, no church anywhere. If the church goes away, then we are only left with institutions that seek solutions. And that only goes so far. Hope must remain. For it is hope that allows us to see the reality of other people. Not just their context, but their very souls. And that is not easy. That's not easy in the regular routine of our everyday lives, at least for me. Can you imagine how much more difficult for our brothers and sisters in Palestine and Israel? I just struggle with it all the time. I know what it feels like to dip into despair. I know what it feels like to be provoked to rage. And I know that within myself, singularly, as a regular guy, I do not by myself have the capacity to hold on to hope. I'm not big enough or capable enough to do that on my own, which is why I bind myself to the institution that is the church. The church is a superstructure, if you will, of relationship that connects across space and it connects across time, wedded to the common commitment to see every soul that is birthed by God, human to divine over time. That is the institution of the church. Human to divine over time. That is the institution of hope, soul to soul to soul. That's what this is. That's what you are. And this hope is not just to be employed in response to these big global issues. Even more so, it's to be employed in the regular patterns of our daily lives. So, for example, when somebody comes into your office and they plop down on your couch and they share with you some intractable problem, and so you, if you're like me, you enter into this knotty conundrum employing your very best solution tactics. And they're good, right? So sometimes you run into a little bump. It's happened to me once or twice. And so that's when you go deep. That's when you go deep. You draw out your very best solutions and you hand them out. Sometimes you bump into a wall even still. So what do? You circle around and you do it again. You go right back in because you're a good friend. And you employ another solution and another solution. Have you ever done that? Oh, I know you. Raise your hand, baby. Right? And you find out at some point that all of your great answers seem to be impotent against this intractable problem. And then, boom, it hits you. It hits you in prayer and it hits you in revelation like an epiphany. You realize that all your friend is looking for is to be seen. Soul to soul to soul. And you can do that. And you can do that because you're a person of hope who knows that the bad thing is never the last thing. And that's what your pledge to Epiphany, this neighborhood church in the city of Seattle, supports. That's what it supports, an institution of hope. Because that's who we are. That is what we do. That is what we teach. It is what we practice. It's what the world needs. It's our duty to hold hope. No matter the crisis, no matter the context. Which is why the neighborhood church, and I'll end here, which is why the neighborhood church is the hope of the world.